Hello, my name is J. Helen Perkins. I am a professor of literacy at the University of Memphis in Tennessee and a member of the ILA Board of Directors. I'm excited to introduce you to tonight's presenter, Matthew R.K. Matt is a founding teacher at the Science Leadership Academy in Philadelphia and the author of Not Light, But Fire: How to Lead Meaningful Race Conversations in the Classroom. Very, very timely subject and topic. Matt believes that any teacher who is willing to put in the hard work of reflection can, through the practice of discrete skills, become a better discussion leader. If you're tweeting along, please remember to tag ILA using @ILA today. There will be time for Q&A. If you're watching live on Zoom, please put your queries in the Q&A box. A recording of this event will be available on Zoom, on Facebook, and YouTube. And without further ado, please welcome Matthew R.K.
Hello, everybody. Give me a second to get my screen shared. There we go. Hello, everybody. It is good to see you. And I'm especially honored that ILA would just think to invite me to lead this session. I got a text message late last week as everything was really going down, and they were saying they gave me the offer to do this session, and it just means a lot to me that you would even think to invite me to do this. So I'll do the very best I can to do that. But thank you so much for showing up. I also know I see about 600 or so people on the Zoom, and I know there's a bunch of people watching on Facebook Live, and I know not a small percentage of you are just signing out of your teaching from the day. And I know I can't imagine a greater honor that you would think to come spend some time with us, like after a busy day of teaching on a Tuesday. So just thank you so much for that. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the book first, just so you can kind of get to know who I am and where I'm coming from. I wrote Not Light But Fire, came out in 2018. It is, and the big driving thing behind it was that I love having race conversations in the classroom. It gives me joy. But I found that when I went to develop myself and get a little bit better at doing it, many of the resources that were available to me were about convincing me to have race conversations in the classroom, and they weren't as much about how to do it the right way. And I found, quite frankly, that to be a bunch of, level one stuff, to the point where I was like, what about folks who have already generally decided we should be having them? What about the folks who don't need to be convinced, who can just like live in this world, observe the world, see the world for what it is, and say, no, this is important for us to talk about in our room. My question isn't, should I do it? My question is, how do I do it right? And so for me, I wanted to write something that started the process of tackling that. And that was my goal. I wanted to do it from the perspective of a classroom teacher and share some things that worked well for me, to share a bunch of things that didn't work well for me, and just kind of get after it a bit with having a conversation about step 2, which is how. So I went to write a how book. So if you happen to pick up Not Light But Fire, I promise I won't spend the whole session plugging my book, but if you happen to pick it up, you'll realize very quickly that I do not spend much time in the why. And for some people, they've reached out to me and like they've noticed that. They're like, well, where's the part where you talk about how it's important to talk about race? So my stance is, where I am, especially right now, is if you don't get that, you're not ready for me. Like, if you don't get that, there's nothing I can write that's going to help you. If you can live and exist in this world and not think that race is worth talking about in the classroom. So that's where I'm coming from. That's where I am. I'm going to tell you a little bit about who I am. Oh, by the way, this is my contact info. Feel free to reach out to me. One of the best things about this 2-year-old journey of being an author that's also new to me is that I've been able to build out a network of folks all over the country and share stuff that's working for them and stuff that is not working for them, and we get to like bounce ideas off of each other. So I definitely, definitely reach out to me. My email address is at that webpage. I look forward to getting to know you even outside of this session. But just want to tell you a little bit about myself. I teach 9th and 10th graders at Science Leadership Academy in Philadelphia. I teach, in addition to teaching 9th and 10th graders English, I'm also our varsity boys basketball coach. I am an assistant football coach. And I sponsor our school's Black Student Union. Those are my beautiful kids on the bottom left. And I also run a nonprofit called the Philly Slam League, where we have slam poetry competitions for Philadelphia area schools that happen in the spring every Friday. And so we work on, discovering the power of our voices and all that stuff every Friday in the spring. So I share all of this just with one clear goal, is that, I'm a classroom teacher. Like I have papers to grade, like right now when I get off this session. That doesn't make my advice any better than anyone else's. That doesn't make my story any more true. But I do find that sometimes when we get the chance to be professionally developed, we don't as often get a chance to hear from people who are still in the classroom. So I kind of share it more like an encouragement. Like if you got something good going on, if you find yourself getting good at something, to just like, to also like enter this space, like the PD space needs you. And so just wanted to put that out there just to kind of get an idea of who's going to be working with you for the next, 40 minutes or so before we get into the Q&A portion of things. So that in mind, I like to start my stuff off always with case studies. Like even when I'm doing keynotes, even moments right now where I'm pretty much speaking to an image of myself, I try to be as interactive as possible. I try to never have anything that's just like us, like just me speaking the whole time, and a lot of case studies. And so we're kind of going to start in that space, and I'll explain how that's going to work. But the first thing I need you to know is if you are on Zoom, to make sure that your chat window is open. I see the little indicator there that says that you've been using it. That's great. I close it so I'm not distracted right away, but I'll open it up in a second. But have that open because this part is going to be interactive. And if you're watching on Facebook, I'm not sure what that interface looks like as far as chatting, but I think you have a chatting option there so you can also participate in the activity that we're about to do. Okay, but just make sure you have that available for you. Let's just talk about it real quick. So this happened last week. It's crazy because I was in like the middle of my staff meeting and kind of not my attention started to shift away to the TV. I started text messaging my dad. I'm like, are you seeing this? Like, this is really popping off. Like, there's some stuff happening. And every day since last week, since Wednesday, we are getting more and more details about the absolute, utter, sinister, like the horribleness of that day, the cruelty that was exhibited, just all of that stuff in the insurrection from last week. And it put us in a place that even though that particular instant is something that is the first in all of our lifetimes, it's put us as teachers in a place, as educators in a place that we might find a little bit familiar, and that is the day after. And it's something for us to think about for a second as we roll into some case studies and actually, I'm actually gonna use the chat. I'm actually gonna open up the window so we can start our interactivity stuff like right now. So have it open. Can you really quickly, both on Facebook and over on Zoom, type in really quickly, what were some of your day afters? Like you taught the day after something, the day after something else. What were some of your big day afters? Columbine, 9/11, Sandy Hook, 9/11, a lot of 9/11s, Boston bombing, space shuttle, A trick, by the way, as the chat is populating like that, is if you just scroll up, it'll slow down, by the way. If you just scroll up a bit, as I just did, it'll scroll down and you'll see it keep populating. You'll see the number get bigger, but you'll be able to scroll like patiently. Parkland, George Floyd. Some of you, and I appreciate this, are using things that aren't like national issues, but maybe a little bit more to your school. Like I see a teacher's death. The OJ verdict. All right, so we are unfamiliar. We are not unfamiliar, sorry, with the idea of the day after. We're in a position that I think is unique to, I think is fairly unique. What's asked of us the day after is something that's not asked of people, of many people in other professions, where we have to like teach and lead lessons in this kind of way, on the sense of that. And so thank you for sharing. Absolutely. Why don't you have all of those incidences that you have put into the chat, that you thought about in your mind as you run through what we're talking about today, okay? Have all of them in your mind. I'm gonna show you 2 case studies about a particular day after that that stands out to me in my relatively young teacher career. I guess I've been teaching 15 years. So in my 15-year teaching career, my biggest day after. And that, for anyone who's been teaching around the time I have, it's probably the 2016 election. And it's something that may or may not, depending on where you live, depending on the politics of your neighborhood and all of those kind of things, what that day looked like is probably, it probably varies a bit, right? But it was a very big day after. And so what I want you to do, just in the spirit of case studies and discourse, I'm going to show you 2 examples of educators having a conversation during a day after for the 2016 election. They're different. And I'm going to ask you 2 questions. The first thing is, and both of them are kind of couched as mistakes. They're news broadcasts. And the news loves a good story about teachers messing up, right? And so these are both news broadcasts. And so something theoretically may or may not have gone wrong, at least, especially in the first one. In the second one, I don't even think the second one is actually positioned that way. So, but in your mind, regardless of what tone the news is taking, what went wrong and any advice. And the second prompt is what was handled well. Okay. So I have a feeling that with both of these, you will have, I have a feeling you'll have an answer for both. I'll put it that way without spoiling too much. I'm actually going to stop sharing for a quick second and make sure. I'm going to confirm that my sound, I did get a little paranoid, I'm sorry, that my sound was set to go. Okay, I'm gonna show you 2 videos. I'm gonna have like an awkward pause. I don't mind an awkward pause after the first video for you to gather your thoughts. And then I'm gonna show the second video, okay? You don't have to write anything in the chat. I'm gonna tell you what to do in the chat when we're done, okay? You can still free to keep using it as a back channel or however you're using it now, but when I'm done, I'm gonna ask that we actually use it for an activity that we're gonna do, okay? Here you go. Here's the first example. Oh, I put the slide in the wrong place. I did it backwards. Okay, here's the first example.
6 o'clock, a Rockford high school teacher goes on a rant about his disdain for Donald Trump, showing a PowerPoint with the American flag upside down. We started looking into this after we got a tip that included this picture taken on Snapchat by one of the students. 24-hour News 8's Heather Walker spoke to the school superintendent.
The results of this election have left half of us happy, the other half upset. But is a high school science classroom the right place to share reaction to the election?
According to the Rockford superintendent, the answer is no. Mike Scheibler told me over the phone that what the science teacher did was wrong. Scheibler was aware of the incident when I called this morning and tells me he's personally dealing with it. He says the teacher is still employed, but he wouldn't go into further detail because it's a personnel matter. According to our tip, the teacher showed this PowerPoint the day after the election. It shows an upside-down American flag and reads, "I'm not sure what my purpose is today. Is it to assure others that just because I'm a white guy, that I'm not racist, sexist, homophobic, classist?" The last line read, "Oh yeah, biology stuff." The tipster also tells us the Rockford science teacher went on to announce he was wearing black to mourn the death of America and then apologized to all of the women and people of color.
I can't believe a teacher would put something up like that.
This woman's daughter is in the teacher's class. She and other Rockford parents said they were disappointed. Even students we spoke to agreed.
I just think it's ridiculous that a teacher would go on a rant about his own opinion in the middle of class. We're here to learn, not hear what people think.
We reached out to the teacher today to ask why he did this. We did not hear back.
To put something like that up, that does not bring our country closer together.
Yeah, I think that might be the sentiment for a lot of folks and parents. Just teach, stick to teaching.
Stick to science.
Yeah.
Kind of surprising to see something like that come up in the middle of a classroom. I mean, you know, hearing from the students too, they said the same thing. So
Yeah, everyone that we spoke to about this, they all had the same reaction. They were just kind of disappointed and said this wasn't the time or the place.
No.
We got to heal and got to come together.
okay.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you.
You see the more things change, the more they stay the same as far as language, right? We got to heal, we got to come together. That should sound pretty familiar. So there's that. And I'm going to challenge everyone who's watching to try your best to try to think of the information that you have coming from the classroom and answer my 2 prompts. Okay. And just as a reminder, it was what went wrong, any advice, and what was handled wrong and what was handled well. Okay. Try to table your thoughts about the news presentation. Does that make sense? That is relevant. It is very relevant. But more about how that teacher handled it. Clearly some mistakes were made. What advice would you give? And what, if anything, in that was handled well? So just think about that. There's your awkward silence. You're going to be responding and writing after both the videos. You can feel free to, chat it up in the comments, but I want to show you both of the videos so you can kind of interact. So you can put them against each other. That first one, I would say, is a fairly emotional reaction the teacher had, right? This next one you'll see is a little bit more of an analytical approach to the same day after, okay? Same day after, but something that is not as emotional an approach. By the way, I'm not using either of those terms pejoratively. Emotional and analytical, I'm just describing what they did, okay? Here's the second one.
Well, Lee, it may have been a presidential election for the record books, but it's also one that will live on in textbooks. News 5's Mike Brookbank is live outside Berea Mid-Park High School. And Mike, students there are asking tough questions about what this presidency might look like.
Yeah, they really are, Frank, and they're questions dealing with the rights of the LGBT community, Obamacare, and abortion. And the government teacher here at Berea Mid-Park tackling them all today.
This isn't the end of the world. Our democratic system works.
That's Matt McGregor's message to his AP government classes following Donald Trump's victory over Hillary Clinton.
The founding fathers wanted to ensure that we wouldn't have a king.
McGregor reminding his students of checks and balances within our government that limit the president's power.
The Senate still has a number of Democrats that could stop legislation if need be.
Legislation that junior Catherine Valencic is worried might target her LGBT and minority friends.
I don't think it's going to be that kind of extreme stuff, or at least I hope it won't be. I hope that Trump will be as good a president as anyone else would be.
Like Valencic, classmate Missouri McCree is optimistic when it comes to a Trump presidency.
We haven't had him as president yet, so we don't actually know how he's going to be. So maybe we give him a few chances, see what happens.
As for the negative narrative that played out during the campaign, here's what one young Trump supporter has to say.
I definitely do think he has a lot to improve when it comes to speaking socially with other people and other governments.
Back in the classroom, McGregor, a father of 2, says parents and educators should follow the golden rule, despite what we've seen on the campaign trail.
Teach your kids to be nice all the time, treat everybody with respect, be accepting of people. I think you have to be nice to your neighbor. Respect that. Respect that somebody else voted for someone. Your person didn't get elected. You have to respect that and move on.
And McGregor also says that one thing to remember is that America has survived under this Constitution for a very long time. And he says despite the differences that were created during this election process, he expects America will continue to survive. We're live in Berea. Mike Brookbank, News 5.
All right. I see us already starting on that one. And so what I want you to do for a second, and I will be awkwardly silent as you do it. If we had anything less than, 722 people in the session, I would try something out where essentially I would say, I'd give you the prompts and have you all just kind of write, and then I'd try to hold off on sending, and then I'd say go, and everyone send at the same time. That's something that works really well in my classroom, and part of me just wants to share that in case you want to try that. That's awesome. I saw it somewhere on social media, and it's great, but there's too many people to even try that now. What I want you to do is try to think of both of these approaches, right? One, where there's a very emotional response. This one, you see almost a very deliberate distance here with I'm trying not to give away too much and let you respond. But why don't I just go quiet for a second, and then I want you to respond to, in both of them, what went well and what's something that you feel like from either a tactical or strategic sense. Strategic meaning like large scale, like at the level of essential questions and enduring understandings and that kind of stuff. And tactical meaning like word choice prompts, like the small level stuff. What tactical and strategic successes and failures happen. So I'll be quiet for like 60 seconds and have y'all fill out the chat. Then what I want you to do is move your cursor up and just read some of what folks had to say. So you can get a sense, this is a community of folks on this session who are trying to get better at it. So I'll be quiet and let you type. I'll be back in a minute. And just as a reminder, it's going to keep moving as people post. You can just scroll up and then it'll kind of stop. It'll stop doing that scrolling, okay? So you can take your time to read that way. I really appreciate everyone's engagement here. These are some very thoughtful things. This is awesome. Okay, so you can feel free to keep, I have the window open so I can eyeball it, and feel free to keep scrolling up and read what folks have to say. So you have a bit of a back channel happening. As I'm speaking, you can kind of see what they're doing. Look, I got, I don't want to give you too much of my 2 cents after reading the chat. There's not much that I'm going to tell you about these 2 examples that you're not going to read it in the chat. I think, as a lot of you have pointed out, a lot of us are rightfully hypersensitive about the news picking and choosing what they like. Basically, they feel like we don't have enough context about what happened in the first scenario. there's a difference between the way the news presents it and what we think happened, like what information we have. And if the community has a clear political leaning a certain way, there's a certain way for them to shape a story to make the teacher look even more essentially like a nut than he may have actually been. So there's that, and I like that a lot of you pointed that out. And a lot of you pointed out how just even acknowledging frustration and those kind of things. There might be a version of that universe where that's a good thing to model for the kids. And we don't know enough about his relationship to the kids to translate phrases like, oh yeah, biology stuff. Like, I don't know how many inside jokes like the news would understand about stuff that happens in my classroom. You know what I mean? Like it's tough. We don't have that much context. And a lot of you hit on with the second example, there's a certain dryness to it. And it seems like a few of the kids, try to put yourself back in that space like you were in 2016. There might not be as much of a space for kids who maybe aren't feeling at their most rational that day. Does that make sense? Like they're not feeling like, they just heard, they're a gay kid and they're hearing someone who's homophobic and they're seeing all the homophobic rhetoric and stuff like that. That might not be the day where they're feeling, you know what, I want to be like super deliberative about like we all can just get along kind of space. They might not be in that space in that moment, et cetera, et cetera. There might be a space. I know as a Black male, I wasn't with it that day. And that's where we're going to go next. I'm gonna talk about my own 2016, but I know I was not in the space. I was not in a headspace where I could be in that class as a student and I might get in trouble that day. I might have gotten in trouble that day. And so let's just throw out for a second. What you can feel free to keep using the chat, but I'm going to close it because I only have so much real estate on my screen here. But I'm going to show you about my 2016, the day after.
Oh, Leah, man.
I actually wrote about it. It's like it's the last chapter of my book. When we'll talk about Popup Conversations in a bit. But essentially, I didn't know what I was going to do because we're in the middle of like an Odyssey unit, right? And I'm sitting there going like, well, if the kids feel anything like the way I feel, this might not be they might not be in a headspace to actually do school the right way. Like some kids, if kids might have some short fuses, they might not even be in a space where they want to talk about Odysseus and Penelope and all that after this day. So what are we going to do? And I wrote in the book, I won't bore you with that, about my thought process as I'm walking to school and all that kind of stuff. But when I get to school, I see this letter. Oh, sorry. That was posted on the front door of our school. My colleagues, I had nothing to do with this. My colleagues who are awesome got together and drafted it. And so you can take a second and read it. SLA is my school. And the kids saw it's a big paper right in front as you first walked in. It seems to be that we wanted to counteract immediately on our day after. First recognize and then counteract the messaging that they had gotten from the rest of the world about insulting, threatening, excluding, disempowering, vilifying, that's not how things work in this building. I wrote a piece for Educational Leadership a few months ago, basically our house, our rules. Like, I don't care what's going out in the world. This is not how we speak to each other in this building. I need y'all to understand that. And so in addition to a few other, we protect each other. When we disagree, we treat each other with decency. We believe in you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's put up in our on our door. And then, so, I described this moment where I walked in, in the book, I walked in, kids were, now I teach in Philadelphia. So just that that is important for this story. But I walked in and the kids were crying. It was like a day of mourning in our school. I don't know what it was like in your school, right? And so essentially what I walked in, I'm like, I don't know what I'm gonna do, but that helped. This helped, because this put me in a mindset of like, we might talk about, this is one of my first big points, the intricacies that second teacher spoke about. We might talk about that at some point, but that's not the move today. The move today is let these students know that they are safe here, that they are loved here, and this is the kind of language that is acceptable in this building. This is the kind of treatments acceptable. All that other stuff, that might be for another day. That all teaching about, checks and balances and all that kind of, that might not be the day after. And that kind of put me in my mindset of what I was going to do. And essentially what I did is I had the kids, I described the whole thing in the book, but I had this class that was actually a class of mostly, they called themselves the Latino stream, because just through some quirk of scheduling, a lot of Latino kids were in this one stream. So that added an extra layer here, right? And essentially I just asked them, how you feeling? What are the words? And they wrote it down, and I had them all give me a word. They put all the words on the board. That's the actual board from my day after. You can see how my 14-year-olds were feeling. I did this activity with every class, but this one, this is the first time I did it. It's the classroom. Numb, furious, intrigued, unwelcome, disbelief, discriminated against, stressed, disgusted, etc. The big salty that hopefully you see written over it, that's just me being dramatic. A kid said, mostly Mr. K, I just feel salty. And I just got all dramatic and wrote that real big on the board, essentially meaning like we didn't expect this to happen. And that's our general feeling. And so my speech to the kids after that was essentially this: be careful today. Like, let's grant each other a little bit more grace today. Today, we might be in a space of, like, your teachers might not know. We weren't trained in this. All right. Tell us what you need, but also everyone cut each other a little bit of slack because we're in mourning. A lot of your folks are in mourning. And if you're not in mourning, how do you approach someone who is in mourning? And we had that conversation. Like, if you are not in mourning and you have a conversation with someone who is in mourning, how do you address them? Well, how do you talk to them? We had that conversation. It ended up being well. And we ended with some other activities that I won't bore you with, but that was the spirit of my day after. Like, this is not about teaching you about election. This is about taking care of you, right? And so what I noticed is that as I was doing that, some kids were crying and all that kind of stuff once we got into the sharing. So I just sent a little follow-up email to them afterwards. And these are some of the responses. See, this is from 2016. These are some of the responses that were sent to me. You'll notice in a couple of them, something that was intriguing is that a few of the kids, the second one, I hope all is well with you and your family too. The second one is, and the last one ends with, how are you holding up? It's interesting how much the kids would check on you too. Like, if you say, this isn't the teaching and learning space where we're going to, this is checking in. How you doing? And you can see this because I got this a couple of days ago. What's today's date? Today is the 12th. I got this one. So I did a similar activity, just asking questions. What questions do you have about the insurrection? What questions do you have? So we talk more in the questions. Let's say, let's take care of each other. What are some questions you have? I'm an adult in the space. What's going on? I didn't walk in with a lesson plan. I walk in like, how do we take care of each other here? And the same thing happened. This was just in my inbox a couple of days ago. You'll see the kid apologize because the Zoom was acting up and all that stuff. But you see, but I was supposed to stay in class to ask, because I wanted to ask if you're doing okay. You seemed a bit down or stressed in class, and I want to make sure everything was okay. I know things can be hard, especially in a time like now, especially for people like us, as an African-American student. Please don't feel obligated to share anything you don't want to. I'm just genuinely a bit concerned because it's not like you. Now, by the way, this I found a little bit, besides being incredibly touched and near tears, I found hilarious because I'm in a space where, like, I thought I was cool. Like, I thought I was holding it together. I thought I was in a space where, like, I was keeping it pro. But apparently, I take it well that the kids are in a space where they're like, they recognize, like, we're a little bit in tune, and that's a good goal. I hope, I'm very happy about that. So I wanted to show you that one just as a start. But then I want to dive a little bit in for the next 10, 15, and then for about 10 minutes or so, and then we'll do some question and answer, okay? First, a quick definition that I put out in the book. All of these were what I call pop-up conversations. Maybe a little bit less the second example, but I still think a degree of that was pop-up, especially the parts about, well, whoever wins, you know what I mean? That stuff. A pop-up conversation, by my definition, is a conversation that exists outside of your planned curriculum. Basically, like, you're teaching about something, and then something in the world happens, and then you say, I'm going to address this. Okay, that's how I define it. I just want to give you that language. And I have a section in the book where I talk about how to do pop-up conversations. These next slides I stole. Someone did a workshop on my book and they shared the slides with me and I liked it. So these next 2 slides I took. I'm gonna run through these quick things, okay? First, do not demand personal sharing without reestablishing clear discussion protocols. When we ask for vulnerability from our students, we communicate that the room is ready for their openness, right? Sometimes we think we've established an environment, I call it an ecosystem in the book. We've established the ecosystem where our conversations can thrive. We think we have, right? And so we just start spending that currency without making sure it's still in our pocket, if that makes sense, right? Like we say, things are so stressed that day, they might forget those discussion rules you taught them. They might discuss those things, so you have to reestablish those things first. Second, public, and this, I often forget until I made myself remember this, to publicly own that it is a pop-up conversation and we've gone off script. Students should know why we brought it to them. Essentially, they shouldn't be spending half the lesson, as my freshmen have taught me that they do, is trying to figure out how is this connected to our book? How is this connected to what we're learning? We should own we're taking a step. We're stepping outside. We don't just assume that because that's what we're doing that they've recognized that's what we're doing. I've spoken to many kids who are really confused about like, I spent half the day thinking we were about to pivot back to Hamlet. Like I had no idea what was going on here. 3, we need to give our students enough time to get to some conclusions. Don't have pop-up conversations right up against the bell. If you're gonna do that, you have to make sure you can commit to it. If you want to have a pop-up conversation, you can't have something where it says, all right, I'm gonna spend this 10 minutes and then I'm going to move to this thing. Because if the kids aren't finished, you've done them damage. So make sure that you're in a space where like, if you start something, you better finish it. Or get as close to finishing it to where kids feel like they haven't just been like emotionally manipulated because the teacher needs to feel better. And last, pay attention to your summary and reflection. This is what we spoke about. How do we feel about that? Make sure we don't rush it, which again makes the bell your enemy. Don't have them up against the bell. Don't have them up against the bell because then you can't summarize and you don't know what they left with. They could have left with somebody, they could leave with the perception of so-and-so in their class is racist. They leave with the perception that so-and-so, if you do not take your time to summarize what happened afterwards, you may be setting these kids up for a rough life out there on social media, in the lunchroom, in the hallway, because you didn't contextualize what happened in that room because you were in a rush. And the second thing is I added these notes to their slide. Sometimes you have to regroup. Sometimes it ain't the moment. Sometimes that's not it. Breathe. Tomorrow's a thing. And you need to step back because the moment might be asking you to step back. Social media might be telling, well, I'll get to that point, but you might need to listen to your students. I'll come back to that point. And stepping back might be what the moment's asking of you. Social media might mislabel discernment as cowardice. There's so much stuff. Talk about it now. Talk about it now. If you don't talk about it, you're a coward. If you don't talk about it, it's because you're privileged. If you don't talk about it, blah, blah, blah. And it might just be discernment. Like it might just be discernment. But thankfully, you don't work for them. The only people you work for is your students. And so sometimes you're in a space where like, I need to step back. I need to breathe. I need to make sure I'm doing this the right way. I don't care what the world is telling me. I need to do it my way towards in a way that best serves the students that I know better than they do. Okay, I just want to give us license sometimes because sometimes the world doesn't give us license to exercise our discernment. And I'm saying that's not weakness. And they just wrote out an example. It's just an example. I'm asking us to be patient to pop up so we'll revisit and insert an honest next step. Say, we're not going to do this right now. Here's why we're not going to do this right now. And this is how I'm going to honor your feelings. This is how we're going to get there. But we literally can't talk about that now. We got 2 minutes left in class. Does that make sense? We got 2 minutes left in class. We got 5 minutes left in class, or everything's too hot right now. I'm gonna acknowledge that's what's being said. I need to think about this and come back at it with my mind tomorrow. Okay. So there's that. Hopefully I'm not going too fast. But then there's this. We get this messaging all over meme culture and just everywhere that we're like superheroes as educators. And we get messages like this: better than 1,000 days of diligent study is 1 day with a great teacher, right? We can, after what happened last week, we can go in there on Thursday and just do something seismic. Hit a home run is the language I use, hit a home run. We can go in and hit a home run. And we start what is called free swinging, where it's like, I'm gonna go in there like that first teacher did, and I'm just gonna free swing. I'm gonna just try to hit home runs. I'm gonna try to put that thing up on the board that changes everybody's mind, put that thing up on the board that speaks truth to power, put that thing up on the board. I'm not gonna think about it. I'm just gonna try to hit a home run, try to solve everything. And so here are some, like in the freedom, like in all the films about teachers who have that big speech, right? That big moment, right? I'm gonna have that big moment. And here are some symptoms that you might be trying to have a big moment. An outsized exertion, like you're super tired, like exhausted at the end, The second, shock and awe tactics. That's huge. Keep that in mind. I think you saw that with the first session, shock and awe tactics. And most importantly, if you're free swinging like that, you're expecting seismic change in a minimal amount of time. I'm gonna change everything. I'm gonna change this community. I'm gonna change this school with this activity that happened because of this thing that's happening in the world. And I think, if this swing connects, it's out of here. But there's one big thing, if you know anything about baseball, and I'm gonna lean into sports for a couple minutes, if you don't mind, about free swingers. The problem with free swinging is that you strike out all the time. The more you free swing, the more you strike out. The more you try to solve everything with one activity, the more you strike out, right? Because you get reckless, all right? And so in a strikeout, when that happens, and normally this is part of another workshop that I do that I think is relevant for right now. Normally I would give you some examples, but I just think about times, because you may have been guilty of it. You might have to not have to go too far of some examples of you going big and then actually having to go home because you struck out. It did not work. It backfired in your face in big ways. And in that strikeout, you might damage student-teacher relationships. And in that strikeout, you might poison the rest of your curriculum because you decided to go for the home run, right? And so what I figured that instead of sometimes, you can look up to whoever you want to look up to. That's not a problem. But maybe in addition to role models like Babe Ruth, we need role models like my man, Tony Gwynn. Tony Gwynn played for 20 seasons and only struck out 434 times. That means only 21 per season. That means most hitters take 3 seasons to strike out as often as he did his whole career. Every time he went to the plate, he said, I'm going to make contact. It's not about hitting home runs. I'm going to make contact. And what I'm thinking is, what is a contact hitter for a teacher? They say, if I hit the ball, there's a possibility I'll get on base. And if I get on base, something good can happen. And to take a break from the metaphor for a second, a contact hitter approaches big moments like this. The day after and a few days after that, if a conversation authentically connects at all, no matter how small, there's a chance the students will meaningfully connect that moment with their formal education. And if they do that, there's a chance that in addition to reminding students that they are loved, which is always priority number 1, that's what I wanted to put out there, authentic learning can happen. But you don't have to hit a home run. You just got to make contact. So what I did, and I'll take the last 5 minutes doing this, and then I'll answer questions for 10, all right, is that what do coaches tell contact hitters? And I wonder, as a writer and as a sports guy, I'm thinking, are there parallels? Turns out they are. For example, use the right equipment, right? Don't have that big old heavy home run bat, all that extra armor and all that kind of stuff. And how do we use the right equipment? How responsive is our curriculum? Can the kids see themselves in their curriculum? How about our conversational packages, the different strategies? Are we using whole class when we really should be small group? Like they don't need to be tackling this whole class. They need to be small group. They need to be one-on-one. This big moment is for a discussion forum, et cetera, et cetera. Are we using the right things? Second, have we keeping our balance? Do we keep our balance? Are we consistent or do we depend on shock? I think that first teacher depended on shock. I've often depended on shock. We expect shock to do the heavy lifting. If I get them crying, if I get them doing this, then they must be learning, right? Well, sometimes they're just crying. They're crying because you made them upset. They're not crying because some big seismic thing happened. They're crying because you wounded them, right? Do we over depend on shock and aha moments? Or are we consistent in just in who we are? Are we like normally a sane person, then we all of a sudden we turn into a weirdo when we talk about race or culture or class or any of those kind of things? Do we just change our whole personality? As sometimes we do. Next one, and this is one of my favorites that's huge, that separates a contact hitter from a home run hitter. A contact hitter works on their timing. They're not thinking about pushing that ball outside out of the park. They're thinking, what do my students need right now? I'm trying to make contact. So I need to time it. And here's how that timing works. Look at this text exchange I had with a student. This is from right after George Floyd this past spring. Take a look at it. And shared with her permission, of course. She was actually excited about it. Can I ask you a question? Sure. How come teachers and educational leaders don't realize that talking about it might not be helpful? I'm like, what you talking about? So we have to talk about the riots and the death of George Floyd, and I don't want to be a part of that conversation. I feel like I see so much between social media, the news, and talking to my friends that I don't really have space to talk or think about anything other than the terrible things that happen to people that look like me. I completely understand how necessary it is to have these certain conversations in certain spaces, but a lot of times Black kids rarely get the option to opt out of these conversations for the sake of self-preservation and mental health, and I'd love to understand why that is. What do my students need right now? Not what is social media telling me I need to talk about, not what is my conscience or my privilege telling me I need to talk about, but what do my students need right now? How do I know that, right? Here's another example. This was up on Twitter only a couple of days ago. I know we're sharing stories of teachers being brave and having the conversations, but I was a Muslim kid in public school during the early 2000s. There's a lot of ways to do this wrong. Have a plan for something terrible being said other than shutting down the discussion. I won't read the whole thing. I just want you to get a chance. There's a few slides. Notice she says, slow down. What do they need right now? And then they offer you a link. I thought that was so interesting. But basically, what do my students need right now? And how do I know? I know I skipped the last few. I just want to make sure I have time for questions there. But how do I know? Do I know through conversations? Do I know through exchanges like what I just had? How do I know what they need right now? Have I asked? What do you need right now? Have I done that? Next thing, contact hitter. Sorry, this is going to be a little bit specific, but they maintain a good swing plane. Keep the bat in the best position throughout the entire strike zone. What that means, super simple, is like from the back of the zone to the front of the zone, that bat is ready to make contact. I'm always ready. I'm born ready to make contact. When I walk into the classroom, I'm ready to make contact on race, equity, all that stuff. What that means here is equity is not merely a subject, it's a lens, respected as such. You don't have an equity unit. You have an equity year. You have an equity, your school is it. And for me specifically, I always use the example of Lord of the Flies. White author, white boys on the island. I know there's a bunch of nonsense on the internet where people are being upset because people are not teaching Lord of the Flies anymore. And I'm saying that's ridiculous. We should always, like the first slide says, get the best equipment, right? But even if you are teaching Lord of the Flies, even if you are deciding I'm still going to teach that, once you apply a race lens to Lord of the Flies and you realize that William Golding has the kids, as they become more quote unquote savage, adopt stereotypical images and behaviors of indigenous people, race is all over that book. Have those conversations. Look for race and culture in all of the units that we speak about as a lens, not just as a begin and end unit that happens in February or other things like that. And finally, drive through the ball. It means once I make contact on the day after, it might not be good. I might not need to roll on to the next thing just because. Like the next day, if I've made connection, maintain contact as long as I can. If they really dug what happened on Thursday after Wednesday happened last week, don't just move to something else on Friday just because that's what your biweekly said. Try to maintain that contact. And more to the point, if you're an administrator, support your teachers as they do that. Make it so they don't feel like they have to hide that. So those are 5 things that a contact hitter does. I know I pushed through that kind of fast, but I want to offer an alternative to this idea that on the day after we have to solve everything. We have to hit a home run. If we make contact, we're good. But even more than that, it's a team game. I'm gonna skip that slide. Trust me, it's good because I like this last one. Just because you're a contact hitter doesn't mean this couldn't happen. You remember Tony Gwynn? I told you about him. This is Tony Gwynn hitting a home run. just because we're not swinging for the fences don't mean we can't hit home runs. If we're just trying to make contact, trying to make it meaningful, trying to make it regular, who knows how many times we put the ball out the park? How many times have we had kids come up to us talking about, oh, this lesson changed my life? And we're like, what lesson? Like, it was really big for them. And all we were trying to do was engage them authentically. So just think, that doesn't mean we can't change the world. It just means if we go in there after every single thing that happens, trying to do the lesson that does it, we're going to strike out more than we have successes. Our goal is to make contact using those 5 things and more. Okay, I meant to have 10 minutes at the end. I ended up with 7. I apologize that. Here's a bit.ly link. If you have any feedback about the session, you can definitely put that there. Not like PD. But in the meantime, we have about 6 minutes for any questions that people have. And you can feel free to follow up with me afterwards. I just shared my contact info with any questions you have after that. But I'm gonna take a drink of this tea, and then you can definitely ask me a few questions.
Matt, on behalf of ILA, thank you so much for being here tonight. It was a really great session. Even though I don't teach elementary, Matt, I can definitely use this with the students I have, which are teachers working on their master's and their doctorate. I love the pop-up conversation. I allow my students to name those types of conversation that doesn't have anything to do with the standards and the curriculum and what I'm supposed to be teaching them. And they call them their Oprah moments. So anyway, thank you. This was great. So we do have we have lots of queries, lots of questions, and we'll try to do as many as we can. But I printed them while you were talking, and there's like 3.5 pages. So I'm just going to start. What tips do you have for our virtual situation? I did not have trouble leading these types of discussions in school, but I'm having trouble in the Zoom calls.
I wish I knew. This one, I love being honest with educators because, you know, my reputation's all I have, and I don't want to present myself as something I'm not. I'm learning the virtual thing as I go. There's a lot of things I would do in my other sessions. By the way, quick plug, I'm about to do a series, I think in March. So I'll put the link in the chat is so wild right now. I don't think I can put the link in the chat, but we'll share out the link. If ILA doesn't mind, we can share out the link to a 4-part series I'm going to do. But essentially, I'm learning as the best I can. So sorry, I don't want to speak as an authority on that at all, except try to lean into those activities that I call house talk activities, which are basically activities that show that are human to human. I still care about you in spite of all of this that's going on in the world type activities. I don't want to get too much into that right now because that's very specific and I don't want to shortchange the question, but it's in the book. I do talk about those things in the book, and then in my sessions, I will talk about how to do it virtually too.
So what about the kids? Margie asked, what about the kids when that feel differently? Some were celebrating Trump's win. When kids are feeling so divided, it's difficult. So how would any advice for that?
I mean, look, that's actually why I said the thing about mourning, because I'm in a magnet school. Kids now Philadelphia is a Democratic area, but they're a magnet school. They come from all over the city. So I had Trump supporters in the room. But part of what we do over the course of the year is try to develop relationships in the class very systemically. So to the point where even if you're happy, you're in a space where like in this space, and that's why that classroom, that post by my colleagues was so important. They're like, in this room, I don't care what your beliefs are. To be honest, we're not bullying. We're not name calling. We are not behaving the way that the adult world has just modeled for you, which to me does a lot. Well, we're in a space. So a kid that day might be inside feeling, oh, my guy won, right? And I'm gonna deal with that. I'm gonna trouble that through my curriculum. But that day, it's more about how do we take care of each other to survive this day. And that day, it was like, how do we talk to someone who's in mourning, even if you're not? And that's how those conversations came to. So that wasn't as much of a problem. I imagine it would be, the whole impetus behind the conversation might disappear in Trump country. And I understand that. Like that might not be a day after. Does that make sense? Like that might not be a day after if you're teaching in a space where everyone's like in a happy space. But that was divisive enough that I think that many people, no matter where you are, was in a space where that day felt weird.
Okay, I think we have time for probably one more.
Sure.
What advice do you have for teachers who want to have these day after conversations, but their district and other school administrators have told them that they are not to discuss these events? Wow.
Keep your resume updated. That's my biggest thing. Like, keep your resume updated. And I'm trying to I'm gonna pull it right now. I'm gonna drop it in the chat. I'm gonna pull it right now and drop it in the chat. Because I wrote about this. And it's this idea, column, my house, my rules. There you go. Let me put that. I'm putting it right in the chat where I spoke about this. There it is. Essentially, we're in a space where, like, if you're told not to talk about it, you got to feed your family. You have to. So I don't mean to be glib when I say keep your resume updated, but I'm also dead serious, right? Because that means you're also teaching in an anti-inquiry space. Like, if you're not allowed to discuss the world, your school is going to forever fall short of their potential, and they're going to stunt your growth as an educator. So, like, I'm not being glib. I mean, like, that might not be a space where teaching and learning is what, if you're the type of person to come to a session like this, you're not going to be happy in a place and in a more detailed kind of way. I think there are ways we can create those communities inside of our schools where we can better manage that. But I don't like to sell snake oil and tell teachers to be martyrs. Sometimes you got to be out. You have to move.
Thank you again for joining us tonight, for participating and asking great questions. And another big thank you to Matt. I would like you all to know that when ILA staff reached out to him last Thursday to see if he'd be interested in leading this webinar, his response was, "I'm busy on Monday, but Tuesday could work." Thank you, Matt, for sharing this critical information at an even more critical time. Matt will be presenting a 4-part digital seminar series, How to Lead Meaningful Race Conversation in the Classroom, for grades 6 through 12, starting February 3rd. You can find more information on Steinhaus Publishers' website. Please keep an eye on the ILA Digital Events webpage for on-demand content and upcoming webinars and learning opportunities. If you're not already following ILA on social media, make sure to do so for the most up-to-date information. If you've enjoyed this event, please consider supporting ILA by becoming a member and sharing the benefits of membership with your colleagues. Matt, did you get the link in about your series?
I did. And I tell you what, anybody, it's easier. And thank you so much. I'm seeing all the things. I really appreciate y'all. Just follow me, go to notlike.com, send me an email. I'll give you the information and all that kind of stuff. But thank you so much for inviting me. Thanks for coming. Like I said, there's no better honor than that y'all taught a whole day and then decided to come to this session, because I did the same thing. I know you're tired, so go drink some water and put your feet up, because that's a good long day.